Welcome gamers, today we're going to take a look at Konami's 1992 classic arcade light gun game, Lethal Enforcers. So for starters, I grew up during the days of the classic arcades back in the 1980s and 1990s, and I definitely remember when this game first hit arcades back in 1992. And so here's the thing, this game was an instant success for Konami. It was like Contra all over again. In fact, you could go to just about any mall arcade in America back during that time, and they all had this game. In fact, you practically had to wait in line just to play this game. And so this did so well in the arcades for Konami that they said, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and port this to consoles. And so later on, we ended up with several console versions, including for the SNES, the Sega Genesis, and there was even a Sega CD version of this game, believe it or not. That one I have not played. And so the game came packaged with its own light gun, the Konami Justifier, which was actually the best light gun that you could get for a home gaming console during that time. It was extremely accurate, it was very responsive, it was by far the best, a lot better than other light gun games of the same era for consoles like the Menacer light gun for the Sega Genesis. That was just awful. I thought it was not responsive, it was not accurate, it was just not a good light gun. Konami's Justifiers were a lot better. And so here's the thing about this game. Every element of this game, practically every element of this entire game was based on digitized imagery, digitized graphics. Everything from the background images to the characters themselves. In fact, all the background images were digitized stills, and all the characters in the game consisted of digitized images of real human actors. And here's the thing, back in the early 1990s, a lot of the focus of the game development world during that time was on realism. You know, they wanted to depict as realistic as possible graphics and gameplay, and that was something that was not easy to do. You know, game development technologies back then were still very primitive in the early 1990s. You know, if you think about the early dives into doing this, you might think of games like Pit Fighter or Mortal Kombat that used digitized images of real human actors as well. That was by far a lot better than Pit Fighter though. And then you had games later on like Street Fighter the Movie Arcade that also used digitized images of real human actors. And so a lot of the focus in the game development world was on depicting realism. And in fact, this game did so well, people really liked this concept, and this did so well that other companies tried to capitalize on this craze, including Taito. In fact, just a year later in 1993, Taito came out with a game that was similar to the Lethal Enforcer series, and it was called Under Fire. And that used digitized images of real human actors as well. In fact, I thought it was a better game than the original Lethal Enforcers. And they took sort of a comical approach to the development of that game. But it was depicted a very, very similar type of gameplay and type of theme as Lethal Enforcers had. In fact, we did a video of Under Fire earlier in 2017. The video is up on our channel. You can always check that out. We'll probably include a link below in the description as well. And so here's the thing. Taito their game did not take off. You know, they figured, oh wow, you know, Lethal Enforcers did so well for Konami. If we could do something like this, maybe we can get our game to blow up as well, get it ported to home consoles, etc. It didn't work out. Under Fire just did not take off in the arcades. Definitely was not as popular as this. But it was a good game, definitely worth checking out, and it also does run in MAME. And so here's the thing. because of the depiction of real-life violence and games like Lethal Enforcers and Mortal Kombat, these games were often the center of controversy from critics for that depiction of real-life violence. And there was a lot of people saying, oh, this is too realistic. And there was it's kind of like with SJWs today, constantly whining about stuff. Well, back in the early 1990s, you had people in the medical world, the psychology world, saying that violent games are terrible and children should never be exposed to this stuff. And then in 1994, we came out with the first real industry adopted rating system from the ESRB. The ESRB came out and said, hey, we're developing a system of standards for rating games, and a lot of games like this were rated MA17, and the gaming retailers started to adopt standards that would abide by those ratings. So if you weren't 17 years old, you couldn't go in the store and buy games like this. You had to have a parent go in and buy them. And that was the thing. Despite all the criticism of games like this, man, every 12-year-old in America back in 1992 played this game, and every kid in America had this on home gaming consoles when it hit. The SNES and the Genesis, etc. It was really stupid. It's fictional violence. It's not intended to be real, And the other thing to note here is that what kid in America hasn't seen every horror flick imaginable? Think of Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, You don't see anybody bashing those movies. They depict real-life violence as well. But people are going to go and attack games like this, which, by the way, this is hardly violent at all. There's no blood in this game. You shoot a character and it's just like, it looks like movie props, It hardly looks even all that realistic at all by today's standards. In fact, modern games are far more violent than this. There's no question about that. And so anyways, as far as this game goes, as far as Lethal Enforcers goes, the original game consisted of 5 stages. And so you had the bank robbery, the Chinatown assault, the hijacking, the drug dealers, and the chemical plant. And there was actually 2 settings for the arcade version, for the original arcade version, that you could change with a set of dip switches within the machine itself. So you could either play the game linearly, where it would just go from one stage to the next on the game would choose which stages you would go to in a linear fashion, or you could flip a dip switch in the machine and you could set it up so that players could start the game and they could start on any stage, which I thought that was really cool because I kind of like the idea of being able to start on whatever stage I want to play and then play through them in the order that I wanted to. And so unlike Taito's Under Fire light gun game, this one didn't have a whole lot of comical elements to it. In fact, the only really comical part about this game is in the Chinatown stage. You may have missed it just a few minutes ago. There was a guy with a meat cleaver chasing after a chicken. I thought that was kind of funny, but other than that, there's not really a whole lot of comical elements to the Lethal Enforcers game, at least not the original one. So this game was all digitized imagery. They like I said, they were attempting to depict this as realistic as possible of gameplay. They wanted to feel like a movie, because games were, back in the 1980s, we're talking about 8-bit graphics, and even with the advent of 16-bit graphics, realism was not something that really existed in gaming. They wanted to go beyond this kind of cartoonish, 8-bit-ish look of graphics and make it feel like it's real, like you're really in the game, like it's almost like a movie, very, very similar to that. And so this game, it evolved. It did so well. Konami later came out with Lethal Enforcers 2. That was a Western theme. we're going to cover that in a later video. I'm going to get to that too. And then of course there's Lethal Enforcers 3. That one has never been emulated properly as of yet. So there's not as many options to play it. And the original arcade games are actually pretty scarce. Those are really difficult to get your hands on. In fact, including the original version, I would assume that at this day and age, the original arcade cabinet for Lethal Enforcers probably fetches a pretty hefty buck. These are still very, very popular, especially among collectors today, and it would not be easy to get your hands on the actual original arcade cabs for that reason. And despite all the controversy of this game, I thought it was really great. I thought this was a really great game. And the Genesis version, the Sega CD version, I've seen some videos of the Sega CD version. They look pretty good. I had the game on the Genesis, so I know from experience it was like a spit image perfect of the arcade version. It really played well. The graphics really looked good. And for anybody who grew up during the days of the Sega Genesis and the SNES, you probably know that the graphics on these consoles were not the greatest, especially on the Genesis. They were pretty choppy at best, but the console port for Lethal Enforcers on the Genesis was really, really good. It was really, really accurate. There was a few subtle differences, but for the most part, it played just like the arcade version. I was really surprised. Another game that was ported over, another arcade shooter that was ported over the Genesis, actually had really great graphics and it played extremely well, was T2 Arcade. That was another one. I was blown away when I got that game on the Genesis and saw just how well it played. It was just like the arcade version. Not quite as good at graphics, but the gameplay was just as fast. It was just as immersive. And it was the same thing with Lethal Enforcers. It was a really good game on those consoles. The SNES version of this, I never played. I can't really comment on it. And I've seen images of it. I haven't watched any videos for it, so I don't have a whole lot to say on that end. But yeah, a lot of the focus was on realism. You know, we started out in the 80s, we had games like the Pit Fighter series, and, you know, with green screens. And then, you know, later on it was Mortal Kombat. And so everybody wanted to capitalize on this and you know, make a profit from the development of realism in gaming. And, you know, today this is something that we don't have to use simple digitized images for. You know, we can use full motion video and so forth in modern games, you know, coupled with 3D graphics processing capabilities we have from modern software. And of course, we have a lot more powerful computing systems to support the development of games today that we did not have back in the 80s or the 90s. And so this game, I mean, it's not super long. It actually feels kind of repetitive at times too. But this was a new concept when they came out with this, so it was easy to see why this was so popular. By today's standards, this would probably be considered to be extremely, what is the word I'm looking for? Just very simplistic, you know. You have these characters that pop out at different parts of the screen. It was a really challenging game, though. You can see, you know, characters will pop out different areas, and sometimes they'll pop out, you know, in front of innocents. And if you shoot the innocents in the game, you lose life, you lose points, it hurts your score, it hurts your grading at the end of the level for each stage. And so you're always trying to dodge and not hit the innocents, like you can see right there. And they almost kind of fool you. It's really easy to accidentally hit one of the innocents when the enemies come out. But the game gets really, it starts out pretty easy. Now characters like this guy with this bulletproof vest, those guys, they're gonna hit you no matter what. Doesn't matter how fast you are with the trigger. It takes more than a full clip to take him out. There's a couple of characters in the game like that guy that just had the bulletproof vest. It takes about a clip and a half to actually take him out. So you're gonna take hits for them. But most of the other characters in the game, you know, if you time it just right, you can always hit them before they hit you. Of course, they pop up all over the screen. Here goes another one of these guys with a bulletproof vest. And you can see he just shot me twice. And then you have these guys who throw grenades, etc. And another thing that was really cool about this game is that you have different weapons. You may have noticed I've had, you know, assault rifles and machine guns. There was a shotgun which you had just a second ago. You start out the game with a standard service revolver. And another thing to note about this is the depiction of the environment. And for those who are not aware, the setting for this game was pitted in Chicago, Illinois, and players actually take on the role of this Chicago cop named Don Marshal, which they really don't talk about much of anywhere in the game, you know, but that was supposed to be the story behind the game itself. You played as the role of a cop named Don Marshal in Chicago, Illinois, where this game of armed criminals have taken over. Oh, this plane scene? This is kind of ridiculous, okay? So, number one, you couldn't open a door in a plane like that because you would decompress the plane and it would ultimately crash. It wouldn't take long, right? And you can see there's a cargo door open. How could you stand in front of a door like that? You'd be sucked out. And so, wait till the part where we get to where the wings are. This is just crazy. So, the guys pop out, the enemies pop out on the wing of the plane. There's no wind blowing. And somehow they can just stand there and fire guns at you. See that? just pop out on top of the wing and they can just take aim at you. How could you just stand there like that on a moving plane, traveling at hundreds of miles an hour? So here's one of the bosses. These bosses are really challenging because they throw so many shots at you. And if you hit all the shots that they fire at you, then you have no bullets left to hit them. So it's kind of like you have to compromise when it comes to the boss elements. You know, you have to say, okay, am I going to go after and try to hit their shots, to try to dodge their incoming fire, or am I going to unload my clip on them? And sometimes it's better just to let them hit you and just go ahead and attack them. And of course, you do have accuracy ratings though throughout each stage of the game. It does tell you your accuracy percentages at the end of each stage, based on how many shots you fired. How it counts how many hits you made. You can see right here, I had 330 shots, 239 hit. My accuracy was 72%. That's not bad, especially considering that this game is pretty laggy in MAME. It does not emulate perfectly. And here's the thing, because there's so many other versions of this game out there, there are much better emulated versions and console versions that I could have covered. But the purpose of doing this video was to cover the arcade version. We cover a lot of arcade games. In fact, I think at the moment we have well over 140 arcade game videos. So we want to cover the real deal. You know, we wanted to cover the original arcade version itself. And so this game emulates pretty good, but it's not perfect in MAME. There are a few points throughout the course of gameplay where your aiming reticule seems to lock up. And it gets really glitchy and you can't move and it gets really shaky. But they're very, very brief moments. It's usually for like 2 or 3 seconds and then it's over. And so here now we are in, this is the drug dealer stage, I believe. Yeah, we've got the boats and stuff. A lot of cars. Can't shoot this. It's really weird, this game too. Some of the vehicles and the buildings you can shoot the windows out, and the other ones you can't. And then of course you get these cops like we had a minute ago. Like, this is really weird. This guy's hanging on this thing. Get these cops that fly up right out in front of you, right in front of the screen. And sometimes I would get confused with those. They really do. There's one right there. It's really easy to mistake them for one of the enemies because they pop up so quick, and your first reaction is to shoot. Because the majority of characters in the game are all enemies, right? But of course they have their blue uniform, and that's what helps to set them apart. And so with this game, I don't know. I was kind of hoping that, you know, after Lethal Enforcers 3 and so many years have gone by, I was hoping to see a revamp, you know, to see a reboot of the Lethal Enforcers series, you know, come out for like either the Xbox One and PS4 or for PC, etc. They could really build upon the series today if they wanted to. Konami, which I know their reputation's kind of gone downhill. All this stuff with Hideo Kojima, and you know they did a lot of really shady things and pissed off the gamers, and you know I tried not to get too involved with that. I know some of the moderators for Gamers Bay on Google Plus have really bashed. They've kind of joined the gaming chorus in bashing Konami, but I'll give them credit for games like this. This was really amazing stuff. You know, Konami did a lot of great game series. Look at Contra. That was just incredible. And they should get credit for the games, you know, the amazing creations that they built over the years, with Lethal Enforcers being one of those. So it would be nice to see this get a reboot on Mario. Oh, there's one of those error codes you can see that's on the screen right now. Like I said, this game does not emulate perfectly. That error code will probably go away here in just a minute. I'm kind of stuck with it at the moment. I don't know how to turn that off. But it doesn't really interfere much with the game, and it seems like when those error codes pop up, they're there for a couple minutes and then they're gone again. It's usually just throughout the course of a single part of the stage, etc. But anyways, yeah, I would like to see this get a reboot. And they did kind of do, they did kind of build upon this series. Another similar shooter from Konami that came out later on was Police 911. And that had sort of a similar theme to Lethal Enforcers. It was more 3D graphics based, and it was more like Time Crisis, where you're kind of like a dodge and attack effect. So it was really not a whole lot like Lethal Enforcers, but it had a similar theme. You know, you're the cops pitted against the armed criminals, the armed elements. And look at this guy. He looks like the Terminator. He comes out with 2 shotguns. He starts just unloading on you.
Let's go.
So let's see here. Now we got it, you know. This is really cool too. I like these rolling car battles in the game. I thought this was pretty cool. The only thing is, it's kind of unrealistic about this. How many people can you really fit inside of a car like this? I mean, if you get like 8 or 10 people, look at that. How many people could you fit in there in one seat? There's 3 or 4 people. It's kind of unreal. It's kind of like the guys in the plane standing there with no wind blowing, and it just can stand completely still. And so, by all means, the graphics in this game were not really all that compelling. But it was the concept and it was the gameplay that made this great. We didn't have incredible graphics back in the early 90s for most games. Arcade games were pretty advanced at the time, but they were still very primitive. And you know, this was really good. This was actually considered to be really high quality graphics and gaming back during that era. Now we have this battle with a helicopter. And so this, we just have to basically shoot all the panels. This guy's gonna fire a bunch of stuff at us. We gotta shoot him and shoot all the panels from the helicopter. This guy takes some time to take out. He's kind of slow. It takes a considerable amount of lives. This was an arcade game. This was a quarter eater. The whole idea was to get you to shovel $15, $20 in this game before you beat it at an absolute minimum. You know, it was definitely intended to make money. And, you know, Konami kind of gave you the benefit of the doubt. It was really, you know, your ability to play the game and not have to continue over and over again. Of course, you kind of have a timer. Was you know, if you were really accurate with your shots with most of the characters, you could save on quarters. But when you get to these boss battles, you're gonna die no matter what. You're gonna have to continue. And yeah, these were really slow for that reason, because they knew that these games had to produce revenue. They had to make money. Very, very expensive too back then. Arcade hardware was really expensive, and I mean, an arcade could pay anywhere from $8,000 or $10,000 to upwards of $20,000 or more for a single arcade game back in the early '90s. They were not cheap. There were some cheaper models from Nintendo, etc. I know in the early '90s, a lot of the '80s arcade games had dropped down to, you know, the $2,000 to $5,000 range. But even then, you know, arcades had operating costs. They had to make a profit, right? So, I mean, how long is it going to take you to make your money back if you're paying $5,000 per game? And then what if you have problems with it? Then it costs money to have it repaired. And warranty contracts on them are really expensive as well. You can see I just had to continue there again. So yeah, this is definitely worth playing in MAME. Like I said, the emulation is not perfect. There's some glitches. Most of them are for a few seconds. And then you can just pick right back up and start playing again. The Genesis version was really good. I don't know how well it emulates. I'm assuming it probably emulates really well. I think most all Genesis games are emulated pretty well today. And the one I'd really like to try out would be the Sega CD version. I would like to give that a try. That one I have not tested out.
Situation under control. Unit 5 out.
And I believe there's really a pretty good number of Sega emulators out there. The one that I have tested out that actually works pretty good is Fusion 364. Fusion is a emulator for the Sega Genesis, Sega CD, 32X, Game Gear, and I think several other offshoots of Sega consoles. So it really emulates a lot of Sega hardware. I haven't tested everything with it. It does have a Sega CD emulator that works pretty good. I did test out Terminator on it. That version of Terminator is nothing. It's kind of a side scroller. It's nothing like T2 Arcade. I did play Eternal Champions on it. That was an old school fighting game. So those actually work pretty good. On the 32X side of things, I tested out Doom, Pitfall, The Mayan Adventure, which, by the way, the 32X version did not have good graphics. I don't recommend it. The Atari Jaguar and the PlayStation versions were a lot better. The Jaguar version actually had the best graphics. Despite the fact that most of the games in the Jaguar are actually pretty crappy. They're really bad. There was even Primal Rage. There was a version of Primal Rage in 32X. Kind of had really cheesy graphics. And then there was T-Mac, Star Wars Arcade. I played those. They emulated pretty well. And it emulates just about any Genesis game I have tested so far. Emulated really, really well. So if you're looking for a decent emulator for the Genesis, or any of the Sega hardware, the old school hardware anyways, Fusion is probably the way to go. Of course, there's other choices for emulators out there as well. And so now I think we're in the chemical plant. So now we're getting close. We're getting closer towards the end of the game. Right now we have just the service revolver. You get these guys with these gas masks on. This is when it starts to get a little bit trickier because you have like sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 guys popping up all at the same time. And of course, anyone that you miss, you're gonna get hit.
Eat lead, copper.
And so, yeah, that's the end of this stage. Or no, we're on to the next part. Yeah, this is where things kind of get tough. Now, from a challenge, from a standpoint of difficulty, honestly, Lethal Enforcers 2, the more Western version of this series, that I thought was considerably more challenging. There was some kind of like bonus rounds where there were some challenges, like you had a Western shootout with 3 characters and you have to hit whichever one flashes first, followed by the second and third, and if you don't, you can't advance in the game. I thought that was kind of tricky. So from that standpoint, this game is nowhere really near as hard as Lethal Enforcers 2. Lethal Enforcers 3, I have not played. I just have not played that, and so I played it. It's been so long, I just don't remember as much about it. This part of this game is pretty tricky, the infrared part, because the characters blend in with the background. Oh, now we're gonna battle this humongous helicopter gunner. This guy is not easy to take out. So this is another part of the game, kind of like that last copter that we battled. This one's really designed just to suck up your quarters too. This is a really long battle to take this guy out. Yeah, I'm kind of confused as to why Konami just slowed down on this, you know. I don't know, like I said, I don't know as far as the reputation goes. I don't know if there's a whole lot they can do to fix it, but, you know, let's face it, regardless of the reputation, if you could build a good game, you get people to play it, you get people to buy it. They really should do a reboot at some point of the Lethal Enforcer series. And they really did a good job evolving the original series too. You know, I kind of like how, you know, the Western theme from Part 2. I thought that was awesome. Kind of that old school Western type of thing. And so, yeah, this helicopter, it takes so much just to take this guy out. It's just ridiculous. This is one of those parts of the game where you shoveled in $5 or $6 at the bare minimum to beat this end boss. And you can see some of the other bosses, it tells you how much life they have left. This one doesn't display the life for the ending, for the later enemies. This is kind of a guessing game. Now it shows. Now it's showing up. Yeah, initially it doesn't give you, it doesn't show you how much damage is left. And there goes that PRI error again. Like I said, that's one of the caveats to the original arcade version running in main. That does cause some problems. 515 shots. You can see my accuracy went down a little bit, 69%. Those later levels get a little bit more tricky because, like I said, you know, you have more characters on the screen. There's more elements to fire against. It's easier to miss. But I didn't have any victims this time. I managed to miss them all. Player 1, Commander. And so that is Lethal Enforcers. And so a lot, you know, everybody says, oh, I already know this game. Let's face it, a million people have done videos of this on YouTube, you know, and people say, yeah, I already know about this game. Well, you may know about it, but you may not know the history behind it. And that's why we do these videos. You know, here's the characters that were in the game. These are the actual, the real humans that were depicted in the game. And that's what they're showcasing here. And so, yeah, you know, it's kind of like people disregard that there's a history behind these games. These were not just video games. There was, you know, these played out. These are a part of our. They have a historical significance. You know, I mean, these games like this popped up right in, you know, the more popular days of the classic arcades. Arcades were a little bit on the decline in the early 90s. There was some decline. There was more decline in 1994, 1995, to be honest. And then they kind of rebounded in 1997. Arcades blew up again. The U.S. economy was really good, and arcades kind of had a second life. They've kind of breathed life again. And then by the early 2000s, they were dead again. Economical conditions, huge advancements in home gaming consoles. You know, Sega had already spent several years porting arcade classics over onto systems like the Sega Saturn. Then we had the Dreamcast, and so forth. So anyways, many thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest videos. That was Lethal Enforcers. Definitely do check out Gamers Bay Community on Google+. There'll be a link below in the description. And if you get a chance, check out Under Fire, that video that we were talking about, that Taito game that's really similar to Lethal Enforcers. And you can also follow Gamers Bay's official brand page on Google+, where we share the latest gaming news and reviews about 7 days a week, sometimes a little less, depends on how much staff is available. So anyways, many thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, take care.